Welcome to Coffee with Coach. Well, today it's iced tea with Coach. It's hot outside. Do you actually know what it costs to open the doors of the sanctuary? Have you a classroom that you let the AA group use? Do you know what that costs? Or how about that local service group that you allow to hold a dinner in your fellowship hall? Do you know what that room costs? If you don't know, you are probably losing money on every single event. Maybe losing money is what you want to do, but maybe it's not. Want to fix that? Stick around, and I'll explain how to estimate your costs and make it pay for you. I'm Steve Petty, and I have 3 goals for these videos: to help you become a better pastor and leader, to save you time and money, to help educate, motivate, and energize you to motivate and energize your church. If you find these videos helpful, I hope you will subscribe. You can punch that little red button right down there. And if you have questions or comments, you can email me at steve@revstevep.com. Today, I'm going to start with 2 horror stories. So I have 2 horror stories that came out of my time at St. Andrews by the Sea United Methodist Church. When I was appointed to the church in 1997, we had a lot of weddings on the books. It was a brand new building, gorgeous sanctuary, high on a hill, overlooking the ocean, panoramic ocean views. Everybody wanted to get married there. I did 55 weddings the first year. All of those weddings were great. They were beautiful, and people loved them. They loved the site. But we did every wedding on a contract for $750. Now, that seems like a lot of money. It was 1997. And it was a brand new sanctuary. And they'd been doing weddings at the church for years in the old fellowship hall. But I got about halfway through the year and we're still in financial trouble. And I went, this is interesting, what's going on. So I sat down and I figured out the actual cost to do a wedding. Well, there's custodians, there's the organist, there's the wedding hostess. Oh, there's the air conditioners. We turn those on at the rehearsal and at the wedding. When I figured out all the costs, it was about $1,000 a wedding, which means we lost $250 on every wedding. On 55 weddings, that's nearly $14,000 a year. The church was subsidizing these weddings, and most of them were not church people. Most of them were Marines from Camp Pendleton, local people who wanted a beautiful wedding, but only a handful were actually church members. Now, admittedly, some did come and join the church later on, and some of those families are still with the church today. But the fact of the matter is, we lost $250 on every wedding, or about $14,000 for the year. And we had contracts for the next 18 months. So if we continued to do that, we would lose another $20,000 going forward. We had to sit down and re-estimate our costs very, very carefully. And then we had to rewrite our contracts, write letters to everybody and say, well, we're sorry, but our costs have gone up and we're going to have to raise the price to $1,200. Seemed like a good deal. We made a little bit of money at $1,200. We didn't lose anymore. The second horror story comes as well from St. Andrews, because after a couple years at St. Andrews, being high on the hill overlooking the freeway, we had a lot of cell phone companies come to us and want to place their antennas around our buildings. So we put up a new cross. We had every major carrier have antennas in our buildings. A lot of new income came pouring in. That really helped make up for the weddings. In fact, at one point we were making about $150,000 a year on cell phone antennas. That was found money. But after about 18 months, we began to notice that our apportionments had gone up a whole lot of money. We hadn't really planned on that. Well, part of that was new members. We'd taken in a lot of new members, new families, children, youth. Things were buzzing along. But those apportionments went up a lot. Well, your apportionments, it turns out, in our annual conference are based 80% on the size of your budget, what you take in and what you spend. And if you take in money from cell phone companies and you spend it on other things around the church, well, that's money that gets apportioned. And so we had to begin to look at those costs, and we had to set aside money. So look at your costs, because you can lose a lot of money if you don't know what your actual costs are. There are ways to fix that. I'm going to talk about those next. How do you go about understanding your costs? First, you have to understand how much room you use and how many hours those rooms are in use. So you have to sit down, make out a sheet, figure out the square footage of every room in the building. Then you look at your building use. So look at your calendar. You look at the hours that each room is in use. How many hours does this group use a room? How many hours does the AA group use it? How many hours is the choir in the choir room? How many hours are the youth in youth lounge? How many hours are the offices used? Some staff may be half-time, some staff may be full-time. Every building use has a time frame, but you're going to come up with a factor for how many hours a month on average every group uses. Square feet per hour. So you're going to get the total number of square feet per hours used for the total church building. That includes Sunday morning worship. That includes a typical wedding. That includes memorial services. You'll probably find out that your church is the largest building user. That's as it should be. But you will find out that some groups use your space a lot of time. So set aside the building square foot per hour ratio, and let's look at costs. Utilities. Electricity, gas, water, sewer lines, maybe your internet costs, anything that you call your utilities, add those up. Each one gets its own line item. Then the not so obvious ones. Insurance. Insurance on the whole building. What's your insurance cost for the building? How about your taxes? Probably don't pay a lot of taxes, but you probably have some taxes, maybe sewer tax or water tax. Custodial fees. What does it cost you in terms of having a custodian that's going to maintain those buildings? Do you have a gardener? What do you pay the gardener? What are the building-related costs on an average year that you set aside? Maybe you set aside a budget amount for maintenance. Any budget-related items that you have that you can identify that you spend money on an annual basis, include those. There's two things I want you to add that you probably haven't thought about. One is your apportionments. Many conferences charge apportionments based on the money that you collect and spend. If you collect money and spend money, a certain percentage of that money is going to be taxed by the annual conference in the way of apportionments. Second thing is most churches don't set aside any money out of their building income as a wear and tear item. I call it a recapitalization fee. But you know that if you're going to have people using a building, over time, it's going to wear out the carpet. Over time, you're going to need to paint the walls. Over time, you might need to replace windows. Over time, you might have to fix heaters. So you set aside between 10 and 15% goes into the recapitalization fund, and it just sits there. That gets added into the amount that you're going to apportion to every building square foot use. So how does this work? 100% of your costs are going to equal this amount. That's 100%. And 100% of your square foot per hour is this total over here. So now you look at each individual group and how many square foot per hour they use. Divide that into your total, and that gives you a factor, a percentage. So you might have a scout troop that uses 1%. Great. Now you know 1% of the total amount that we spend on building every year is what it costs to operate the scout room. Now, the scout's going to operate for free because you sponsor the scout troop. That's as it should be. That's a ministry that you perform. The choir isn't going to pay for the choir room. But any outside groups you have using the building on a regular basis should be paying their fair share. They should be paying an amount that won't cost you money because you've forgotten to include your apportionments, won't cost you money because you've forgotten to include your wear and tear items, but will actually pay for the costs of operating the space that they're using. Then you know your costs, and then you can operate on a fair basis. If you don't know your costs, and you haven't included apportionments and recapitalization, then you're going to lose money on every single building use you have. So it's important to build that spreadsheet and figure all of those things out. Somebody who's really, really good with spreadsheets in your congregation can sit down and figure this out. If not, I have one that's posted on my website. You can download that one and then customize it for your church. But do the work and figure out your actual costs, because you don't want to lose money renting your building. So next week, we're going to talk about things you should be planning in September. I'll give you a hint. None of them are in September. What should those be? We'll talk about that next week on Iced Tea with Coach. Still cold. See you then.